My name is Brad Pomerance. You may know me from Jewish Life Television. I am the host of JLTV's global travel series, Airland and Sea, also our new genealogy-themed television series, Generations. It is my supreme honor to welcome Sarah Levin onto our program. Sarah is the executive director of JIMENA, and JIMENA stands for Jews Indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa. I have known JIMENA for a long time. It's a phenomenal organization. And it recently partnered with NYU to put out really a groundbreaking study, Sarah, if I may say. I mean, it really is groundbreaking. And the study is called Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews in the United States, Identities, Experiences, and Communities. And what I thought we'd do is really break it down. Before we break it down, though, Sarah, I want to get some definitions out of the way. So I am Ashkenazi. That means I descend from Jewish people from Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe. I'm personally Polish and Hungarian, but basically Central and Eastern Europe, those are the Ashkenazi. Who exactly are the Sephardic Jews?
So typically, Sephardic Jews are defined as Jews whose descendants emerged from Spain, were expelled from Spain in 1492 and after, and spread throughout North Africa and the Middle East.
And
Mm,
Portugal as well, no?
Portugal as well, the Iberian Peninsula, the
Right,
time.
right. So when I was younger, in the 20th century, it was either Ashkenazi or Sephardic. But that really doesn't tell the whole story. We know that there's something much more than just Ashkenazi and Sephardic, and a term that has been used increasingly. And candidly, I'm glad. I mean, I appreciate the term. You know, we can talk about whether others do, but I appreciate the term. And that term is Mizrahi. What does Mizrahi mean, Sarah?
So Mizrach actually means east. Idota
Okay.
Mizrach was a term that was used in the early years of the state of Israel to describe the communities from the Middle East and parts of North Africa who were pouring into Israel at the time. And Idota Mizrach means the communities of the East. These Jews were coming in and then were collectively defined as Mizrachim, as the Easterners.
Right. So generally speaking, as I understand it, and help me if I'm off base, if someone is a Sephardic Jew, 500 years ago, they descended from Spain or Portugal, and their families after the Inquisition likely wound up in Morocco, maybe the Low Countries, England, Turkey for sure, the Ottoman Empire. And if one is Mizrahi, that really means they're descend from folks from Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, really the Middle East. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yes. In Israel, all of these communities were collectively defined under the umbrella of Mizrahi or Sephardic. The words have been used interchangeably, and the religious observance of these Eastern communities, whether they were Sephardic or
Yeah.
Mizrahi, is uniform throughout and
And we'll
very,
talk about that.
yeah.
Definitely. I don't want to jump ahead too much. That's a quick little teaser for you. Um, uh, let's talk about the North American experience, because what I've learned, you know, I pretend like I'm a PhD historian. I'm just one on TV. But what I've learned is that in America, really the first Jews to land in the Americas were Sephardic.
Yes.
I mean, is that what you know? That's what historians tell us?
Yeah, there was a community that fled the Inquisition from Brazil into the United States, and those were one of the first, the earliest Jewish communities in the United States, I believe, was
Right.
in Rhode Island. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I understand, and I learned this from the travel show I host, forgive me, it's this group of Jews escaped from Spain and Portugal, wound up in the Low Countries, and when Holland took part of the east coast of Brazil in the 1600s, Jews that were formerly Spanish or Portuguese came to the east part of Brazil. They were there for about 25 years. Portugal reconquered. They had to get out. The Inquisition was still going on in the 1650s. They went to the Caribbean, where Spain and Portugal wasn't, could be Jamaica, could be Barbados, and then into the Americas, Savannah, Newport, New York, something like that.
Yeah. But I think what's important to note about those communities is that they were ultimately kind of all assimilated and integrated along
Mm,
with the communities that came from Eastern Europe and Russia. There was another wave of immigration that happened in the early 20th century from Turkey and from Spain, and those were distinct. Those communities were distinct from the founding Jewish communities in the United States. They settled in New York,
yeah.
spread to cities like Seattle, Los Angeles. And I think that those communities kind of laid the foundation for Sephardic Jewish life in the United States as we know it today.
Yeah, I mean, you speak the truth. And what's so interesting about what you're suggesting is that, the first Jews that arrived were, the Sephardic Jews. And then we see this wave of Ashkenazi Jews
And Germans.
after 1880. And they wanted to kind of be like the Sephardic that were already here. Those were mostly Germans in the early days and then Polish in the later days. So they all kind of created this one big happy community. But what that did do is we saw a lot of intermarriage. I mean, God
Yeah.
forbid an Ashkenazi and a Sephardic should marry. I mean, that's what it was like. Am I right? 100 years ago?
I think that the divides were actually a lot more distinct. I think that the communities lived in different locations, even if they were in New York, there were enclaves that emerged, there
Right.
were synagogues that emerged. I think a lot of the separation between the early Ashkenazi, the early Sephardi Jews from the early 20th century was actually a result of immigration policy, U.S. immigration
Uh,
policy
uh-huh.
that created quotas for Jews coming from, or for all people coming from Mediterranean countries. The quotas were different for people coming from Northern European countries who
Oh,
were
yes.
classified as white. This
Right.
this contributed actually to the racialization, I think, of a lot of Sephardic Jews and kind of created a wedge between these two communities that were
Yeah.
they were all Jews, but they were treated differently when they came to the United States.
Well, I mean, I happen to love the show Beauty Queen of Jerusalem on
Yeah.
Netflix, and you see that, God forbid an Ashkenazi should marry a Sephardic. That's what we saw, and that was in the 20s and 30s. But I have a close friend whose parents got married in the 60s,
Yeah.
and, she's Ashkenazi, he's Sephardic descending from Turkey, and it was a mixed marriage. I
Well,
mean,
my
it was
parents
like,
got married in the '70s, and it was a mixed marriage then.
so you are of Ashkenazi and Sephardic descent?
Yeah, my father's
Yeah.
family came from Turkey, my mother's family came from Ukraine,
Yeah,
and
same as my friend. Yeah.
it was intermarriage for sure.
Yeah. So let's then talk about what the intermarriage of the Ashkenazi and Sephardic and the huge wave of Ashkenazi caused in terms of demographic patterns based upon your study.
Sure.
What percent of American Jewry, and we're talking American or North American?
We're talking American,
Okay,
United
what a
States of
percent of
America.
American Jewry are Sephardic and or Mizrahi?
So what our study tells us is that 10%
Yeah.
of Jewish Americans are Sephardi Mizrahi. I think a lot of Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews hear that number and they recoil. Like, there's no
Mm,
way. The numbers have to be much higher if you're a Jew living in
right.
Los Angeles or New
Right.
York,
Because we have a large Persian community as
especially.
an
Yeah,
example.
and
Right.
if you're a Persian Jew living in a Persian enclave or Bukharian Jew living in a Bukharian enclave, of course it feels like that number is so low. And the number is the national average. So cities like New York and Los Angeles, the number is probably higher,
Sure,
but
sure.
10% is the national average.
You mentioned Bukharian, and I
Bukharian.
want to delve quickly into that. Are Bukharian Jews, and that is like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, that area, are they Ashkenazi, Sephardic, or Mizrahi? It's a little confusing.
They so the Bukharian Jews that I've met, certain
Uh-huh.
communities who went to those mountainous regions identify as
Yeah.
Mizrahi. They
Okay.
follow Mizrahi customs, they
Got it.
follow, or I should say Sephardi customs, they follow Sephardi Nusach. They
Oh,
don't
they define as Sephardi, not Mizrahi.
Mizrahi.
Oh,
So these words, remember, they're all pretty modern, right? Like a Jew in Turkey did not define themselves as a Sephardic Jew. A Jew in Uzbekistan did not define themselves as a Mizrahi Jew. They were Bukharian Jew, or they were a Jew not even from Turkey, but from a specific region, from the Dardanelles, from Istanbul.
Right.
This was
But
everywhere.
today,
Today,
would you say that if one is Bukharian
they're
or
Mizrahi.
Bukharan, they are Mizrahi?
Yes, they don't follow Ashkenaz tradition.
Right. Okay, so let's delve deep into the distinctions between the Ashkenazi versus Sephardic and Mizrahi. Is what you learned in your study that Sephardic and Mizrahi are more similar to each other than
Yes.
to Ashkenaz?
Yes,
Mm.
for sure. Absolutely.
Why?
Because
Why?
of how they observe Judaism, because of how
Explain.
they pray, because of the liturgy, because of the traditions, the minhagim, because of they follow the halakha of the Sephardi rabbis, and the Judaism that emerged in Europe, the denominational Judaism, never spread into the Middle
Hmm.
East and North
Right.
Africa. We
Right.
remain traditional.
So I want to dig a little deeper in that because, as I mentioned earlier, you know, when the Polish Jews arrived, let's say in the early 20th century, they wanted to be like the German Jews who had arrived in the 1880s, who wanted to be like the Sephardic Jews who had arrived in the 17 and 1800s. My personal perception is that subsequent immigrant groups, let's call it the fourth wave, the Sephardic, Mizrahi, Persian, not quite as interested in assimilating into existing Jewish Ashkenazi communal life. Is that fair?
No, I don't think so. I think it really
Oh, do
depends.
tell. Do tell.
And
Do
I
disagree. I love
The
disagreements.
study taps into this a little bit. I mean, the
Uh-huh.
study only includes 4 demographic portraits, so 4
But a
population.
good four. A good
Yeah,
four.
a good 4.
Yeah.
I think
Mm.
that it depends on the time, the period of immigration. It depends on the structures within the specific communities that exist already. It depends on the religiosity and the norms established by rabbis of those communities. I think there are a lot of factors, and I don't think it's as simple as Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews don't want to or haven't assimilated or integrated along with their Ashkenazi brothers and sisters. I think it's
That
variable.
but that being said, in my perception, and I think your study bears this out, Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, and I include Persians in that group,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, I mean, they are keeping Jewish communal institutions alive
Which Jewish
from,
institutions?
well, like Jewish day schools. I mean,
So that,
yeah,
yeah, and I think
please.
it's really interesting because the report found this, that by and large, Sephardi Mizrahi Jews are younger. They're much more involved in Jewish institutional life, belonging to synagogues, affiliating with the Jewish community. There still is a strong desire to participate in organize and like an actual
Yeah.
the act of participating in organized Jewish life.
To their credit. I mean,
Yeah,
it's really, I mean, I'm speaking about LA and New York just because of those communities. I kind of have my finger on my pulse or whatever the cliche is.
yeah,
Um, but there's no doubt that, you walk into a synagogue or you walk into a Jewish day school in 1975, it's very, very Ashkenazi.
yeah.
You walk in 2025, I mean, it's a beautiful panoply demonstrating the rich diversity that is the Jewish community of America today.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with period of immigration, right? Persian Jews came to the United States very recently, and the study looked at 4 communities that have immigrated in post 1965.
And let's mention those four because I think it's relevant. I mean, the
Sure.
four being Syrian, Persian, Latin, meaning Latin America, and the fourth was
Bukharian.
what's the fourth?
The
Say it
Bukharian
again. Bukharian. Yeah, Bukharian.
community in Queens. And I think it's important also
Yeah,
to say that the study, it wasn't just looking at Persian Jews nationally, it was Persian Jews in Los Angeles. It
my
was,
people. My people. I
yeah,
mean,
it was,
I'm of Ashkenazi descent, but I mean, I'm surrounded by
right.
Persian Jews. And, I hate to be stereotypical, but they couldn't be nicer. They couldn't have better food. They couldn't be more loving and they couldn't be more committed to Jewish life in America. I mean, that's just my perception.
Yeah, the study also found that Zionism and the role of Israel plays a much larger role in the lives and the values of Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews.
And let's dig a little deeper in that, because one point of your study, which didn't surprise me, um, just based on my anecdotal experience, I think it's, again, these are generalizations, but I think it's fair to say you talk to an Ashkenazi Jew on the west side of Los Angeles, they're probably left of center. I think it's fair to say probably left of center. You talk to a Persian Jew on the west side of Los Angeles, probably right of center.
Yeah.
And what did your studies tell us about,
Exactly what you were
yeah,
just reflecting, that Sephardi
why?
Mizrahi Jews are
Yeah.
more socially and politically conservative.
Why?
So I don't have
Why?
data. I mean, anything that I share, it's all anecdotal. I think
Uh, yeah.
Sephardi Mizrahi Jews understand certain realities of living in an anti-democratic country, of being religiously and socially restricted and oppressed. They understand the threats surrounding Israel because some of them have actually survived with the skin on their
Right.
bones,
Literally.
literally, anti-Semitic violence and mobs from the Middle East and North Africa. And I think that those experiences, those collective histories, have shaped their thinking and their approach and how they think about what progressivism is
Yeah.
and what it fundamentally could lead to. I think you can also look at the experiences of Soviet Jewry side by side, that of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, because I think that they were dealing with similar threats, similar structures, similar
Sure.
oppressions.
Or Latin Jews in Miami, let's say. I
Exactly.
mean, you know, coming from
Exactly.
Cuba, Venezuela,
And it's
you know,
interesting because
yeah.
I think there's this tendency amongst the Ashkenazi dominant space to assume that brown Jews, Jews who are immigrants, Jews who fit this certain profile are coded as automatically being liberal. They must be liberal, right? And it's just not that simple. It's
You mentioned brown Jews. And, we could go on and on, Sarah, about are Jews white? That's
yeah,
a whole other podcast.
yeah,
But I do want to dig a little deep because I know your study looked at the question of,
right.
do Sephardic Jews or Mizrahi Jews consider themselves Jews of color? And what is a Jew of color? I mean,
So
so many questions just in,
yeah, so
yeah.
I don't wanna answer definitionally what a Jew of color is because I'm not an expert on that, but I do think
Yeah.
that it's self-identified, right? I think
Right.
typically what
I
we
agree.
say, it's Jews who identify as a Jew of color are considered and treated as Jews of color. Um, by and large, what our study found is that Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews don't identify as Jews of color. Um,
Yeah, which is interesting because, look, I mean, what is of color? And that's a whole other podcast. But I think it is important to note that that's where they're coming from. Now, I need to admit something to you. I'm kind of that guy that if I see someone that doesn't look Ashkenazi, I want their whole story, and it's the first question I ask. But I've learned don't be that way anymore. So, I've been taught don't other someone by approaching them in synagogue and saying, "Oh, you're slightly olive. Tell me your whole story." That's just not an inclusive approach.
yeah.
And so, do talk about, because your study looked at that, about inclusivity. Because, look, I may be a dorky dad, but the reality is, when you ask someone that question right out of the box, it's not cool. It's
What is your
othering.
race?
Yeah, or, "Oh, you're from Iran? Oh my God, tell me about your escape."
Oh,
That's
I
not the
think
first question, you
yeah, but
know?
I think that when a Sephardic or Mizrahi Jew or an olive-skinned Middle Eastern
Right.
Jew walks into synagogue, I don't think that they are dealing with the same kind of litmus test, how are you Jewish, as a Black Jew or a
That's
Chinese.
fair. That is fair.
And
Uh,
I think that I think there's quite a few studies that speak to that.
so let me just ask a question a slightly different way. Uh, what can we in the quote dominant Ashkenazi community do
Yeah.
to ensure that we create an inclusive space for those that may be Sephardic or Mizrahi? How about that?
So I think that there's first of all, there's a whole sub-report in the study
There
that's
is.
focused on recommendations, and it's focused on different layers. It's very, very, very rich. And I encourage anyone and everyone who's asking that question to take a look at the recommendations piece of the study, because there's not just one thing you can do. There is there are multiple things you can do, and I think it depends on how you're affiliated, what your role is, how much power you have, how willing your organization or your community is to become more inclusive, and also how you think about inclusive. Like, I would say the first thing is, how do you think about inclusivity, and asking yourself that question, looking at some of the shifts and how our study recommends approaching questions around inclusivity and paradigms around inclusivity.
Sure.
So I
Let
wish I
me,
could give you
yeah.
one short answer, but I don't.
Well, but here's the short
How
answer.
would you think?
There are answers. That's the key. There are
Yeah, there
answers,
are. There's a lot.
or at least recommendations.
Yeah, there's
Let
a
me
lot of.
ask you, Sarah, once you got the results, were there any elements that surprised you as opposed to confirming what you thought you knew?
I mean, yes, there were parts of the study that really I think were surprising. And I do think that some of the data around economic vulnerability was a big
Yes.
one.
And explain that because that shocked me as well.
Sure.
Explain.
So what the study found is that 27% of Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews are considered economically vulnerable.
And do you know
And
the Ashkenazi number?
I believe that there's new research that is coming out where it's 25%. So the variance
Okay.
isn't huge, but I do think that, going back to stereotypes and ideas,
Yeah.
I think there are
Persians and
assumptions
yeah. Yeah,
that
about
Sephardic and
yeah.
Mizrahi Jews are very wealthy.
Right.
And
Not
what this study
necessarily.
shows us is that that's not the case, that there's a lot of economic vulnerability in our communities. Um, Also, another interesting data point. 34% of Mizrahi and Sephardic Jewish Americans were born or raised outside of the United States. So I think when we talk about diversity at this point in 2025, we tend to hyper focus in on racial and ethnic diversity. But the fact is that there still is a huge immigrant population amongst Jewish Americans that need services and that need to be treated differently. And I also think, going back to the questions around diversity, there's also ideological diversity. You touched on this before. 62% of Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews identify as politically moderate or
Yeah.
conservative. So
And
if
I have to
we are
be honest
going,
with you. Yeah,
yeah,
to be honest with you, I mean, I am aware in many communities that that has caused a bit of a some tension
yeah,
between the Ashkenazi and the non-Ashkenazi
yeah,
because the
and it's
Ashkenazi, yeah,
I don't think it's something that we should be shying away from. I think if we're really truly interested in building inclusive communities, then we need to start having conversations and understanding. I think Ashkenazi Jews need to understand this number, why it is high, and vice versa. I know it can create tensions, and it has created tensions in certain communities, but we can't talk about diversity if we're going to ignore these things around immigration, around ideology, around socioeconomics, et cetera, et cetera. And diversity work's messy and uncomfortable. This is part of it.
sure.
Yeah,
Sarah, as we conclude, I want to ask you very simply, why did JIMENA do this? Why did you partner with NYU and others to
sure.
do this groundbreaking study?
Aside from the fact that we needed demographic data, so we needed the hard cold numbers, 10% of Jewish Americans are Mizrahi and Sephardic. For us, what we were interested was commissioning a report that was actionable. Data by itself doesn't mean anything. Data that sits on a shelf or just gives us a number doesn't do anything to actually shape our community. What I'm most proud of in this report are the recommendations and the paradigm shifts, and how rich that piece of the study is, because what we want to be able to do is deliver the data alongside a set of recommendations that reflects the data and that lays a foundation for the community to continue doing its work of building a more inclusive, knowledgeable, and connected ecosystem.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so if you want to learn more about JIMENA, read the study, just go to their website, www.jimena.org. Actually, your summary was quite good. I mean, it's very digestible. I mean, the whole study's fantastic, but you can really get through the summary quite quickly and easily. Sarah, you have to promise me we're going to kind of continue to stay in touch. I your newsletters, I follow your work. It's phenomenal.
Thank
And of
you,
course, I
Brad.
want to thank you, our listeners, our viewers, for joining us. My name is Brad Pomerance. We've been speaking with Sarah Levin. She is the executive director of JIMENA. Of course, you can always catch me on JLTV. Don't know how to catch JLTV? Go to www.jltv.tv/channels. Thanks so much for listening and watching on Would You Guess with Brad Pomerance.
Thank you, Brad. Take care.